the responses of the events we're here to talk about or harp on any shortcomings, but we can learn from them. So the after action reports and debriefings and interviews of responders to these incidents that are on the screen right now are quite extensive, and there's really no way to fully assess everything that went on at these events in one sitting. So I've sort of cherry picked some of the bigger opportunities for improvement, as well as successes, if you will, for us to discuss today. If there is more interest in these incidents or similar topics, we can dive into them more in depth, or perhaps invite one of the actual responders to these events or incident commanders to one of our future MTAC events. Also want to warn that while there aren't any graphic pictures of wounds related to these events, I do have some short videos that show the actual events as they were occurring. So just kind of want to put that out there. And feel free to ask any questions in the chat if you have any, and I'll try to work them into the conversation. Everybody good to go? So starting off with a couple quotes from Bill Salmoron, the chief of New Orleans EMS, that I think will be applicable throughout our conversation today. So starting off with, you don't see that many fatalities in one place, and you throw in possible explosives, an active shooter, or at least you shouldn't see these things in a civilian EMS world, but we do. So that's the chief of New Orleans EMS who dealt with a vehicle as a weapon attack recently, just a few months ago. Then same person, Chief Salmoron, saying that anyone can command a scene. You don't have to be a paramedic. You don't have to be a chief. You don't have to be a doctor or whatever it is. Anyone can do this, and it's a vital function that we'll see more in depth later on. So the today's panel, we weren't at these events. Dr. Green mentioned everyone earlier. I'll be moderating this discussion. Brian Smith from Medic has a ton of experience with special operations and big events and mass casualty responses here locally. Marissa works in our emergency department at Carolinas Medical Center and works closely with emergency management. And Dr. Cunningham does this every day as well, and inviting his perspective from the trauma surgery side, something that we don't always hear about, what is capable and what's not capable, as well as he did training at shock trauma in Baltimore, so he can provide a unique perspective from that side. Unfortunately, we have no disclosures to give you. Nobody has any hidden wealth that I'm aware of, so we have to put that there. But I wanted to start off our actual discussion with what is a mass casualty incident, and just individually, because we all work in different areas. What Brian might consider to be a mass casualty incident isn't the same thing as what Marissa says. It's going to be the same as what Dr. Cunningham says. So Brian, when we get started, give me your thoughts on what a mass casualty is when it comes to pre-hospital.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. You go straight off the definition. It's any single incident that stresses the available resources in whatever system that you're looking at. We're very fortunate, excuse me, in Mecklenburg County that we typically deploy a lot of resources throughout a 24-hour period. So we can handle routinely a 5 to 8 patient car crash or something of that nature. When we start looking at things that are a little bit more extensive and expanded scope or complex, is when we start using that mass casualty incident label. We did go back several years ago and have currently tweaked our MCI level response plan. So we do have some thresholds, if you will, on patient count, which allows us to deploy some resources pretty quickly with a very focused language and communications over the radio to get us resources. So you could go by patient numbers, but we still try to practice and train on any single incident that stresses your available resources in the system in which you're working.
Great, thanks. So Marissa, on the receiving end, in the emergency department, it may be a little bit different because there's a little bit more involved, limited number of rooms, limited number of staff. There may not be the cavalry coming from the next hospital over. How would you define a mass casualty incident briefly from the emergency department's perspective?
From the emergency department perspective, a mass casualty is anything that is going to overwhelm your resources, whether that be your staff, your beds, or the people you have that can manage that type of patient. So if you have patients that need to be intubated specifically, and for some reason you don't have but one ventilator, a mass casualty would be something that requires 2 ventilators until you can get another one.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Cunningham, so in the OR, as somebody who's that's where you work, how would a mass casualty differ for you?
Yeah, mass casualty is very different on our end. I think we kind of get to where it's a melding of resources, and by the time you get to the OR, you're looking at an entire chain of events. So to me, I use the classic definition as well. It's going to overwhelm your resources. You're in a mass casualty incident. But to me, it's the weakest link in the chain is essentially going to dictate that, right? So if you start from the time of the incident, for Brian, it might be, hey, I'm like short on maybe hazmat crews or something for like a major spill, and this is going to put a lot of things at risk, and that might dictate a mass casualty incident. Whereas the number of patients you get might be relatively minor, and risk and emergency department can say, hey, we can handle this just fine, right? And to me, a great example of that is, we've had things where it's been that next thing is needed. Are you going to have somebody that you don't have a ventilator for? Could be a mass casualty incident, or you could be, for instance, back in Baltimore in the riots, we had a night where I had 92 traumas in a night. And we didn't declare a mass casualty incident with that because we had enough resources present from structuring ahead of time that we're able to absorb a load of an extra 92 patients overnight and never had to officially declare an MCI. So I think it varies wildly and it depends on where you are in the process. But to me, if it triggers at any point, you're part of the MCI response. OR specific, I think it varies so much night versus day, but it's clearly when you don't have the resources to provide that patient coming through that has an operative need.
Great. Thanks, everybody. All right, so we're going to be looking at 3 incidents today, more specifically, the vehicle ramming on Bourbon Street in New Orleans early on New Year's Day, the mass shooting at the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival in Las Vegas, and the mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. Again, as mentioned earlier, we're not here to judge, but instead to learn so that we can deliver as good of care as possible to our patients in the future. Some of these incidents had dozens of after-action reports that were published, some being all-encompassing and a big summary of everything, some more specific to a certain specialty. And so it'd be impossible to incorporate every bit of that to this presentation today. But I encourage you to read some of them or all of them. Also, given the number of different reports, there may be some discrepancies in some of the timelines or some of the numbers mentioned later on today. So just keep that in mind. So briefly, just wanted to give a real quick overview of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. I know our region is much bigger than that. It's not just Charlotte. It's not just Mecklenburg County, but we had to pick on somebody. And so having the majority of the trauma centers and a large number of hospitals and also similarities to these cities that we're going to be speaking of. It's actually a lot of good comparisons to these incidents here. So I wanted to review what all is here, what all we have, and to have us keep this in mind as we look at each incident and compare those similarities with our city and our region compared to the examples we'll show you. So how do you think that our EMS and first responders and how would our hospitals respond? So if you didn't know, we're not quite to the 1 million population threshold. We're pretty close, increasing by like 125 per day, I think it is. But if you look at Mecklenburg County as a whole, we're at 1.2 million. The Charlotte Metro, which is a slightly larger portion of it, looking at Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia, Rock Hill, that little slightly larger region is at 2.8 million. If you incorporate our entire Metrolina region, it's about 3.3 million people. Our primary EMS responder, our only EMS responder in Mecklenburg County is Mecklenburg EMS Medic, where Brian's from. And they operate as a third service, which is separate from the fire department and the police department. And they run about 160,000 calls a year. So you can keep that in mind when talking about our other organizations later on. The primary first responder service is Charlotte Fire Department here in Mecklenburg County, but there's also 12 other town and county fire departments all throughout Mecklenburg County. And we have the luxury of having multiple trauma centers here. There's a level 1 trauma center at Carolinas Medical Center. Down the road is a level 2 trauma center at Novant Presbyterian. And then there's also level 3 trauma centers all surrounding us. Atrium Health Cabarrus is about 30 minutes away from the center of Mecklenburg County. Caramont's about 20-ish, maybe 30 minutes or so away. Atrium of Cleveland's about an hour away. And then Piedmont Medical Center in Rock Hill is about 30 minutes away, given good traffic. Then we also have a level 1 pediatric trauma center on the same campus as Carolinas Medical Center. We also have the luxury of having 8 non-trauma center hospitals in Mecklenburg County, along with 5 freestanding EDs. And then there's 3 additional hospitals and 3 freestanding EDs immediately within about 5 minutes of the Mecklenburg County lines. So we have a lot of options here when it comes to where we can take our patients. So looking at Las Vegas, where our first incident took place, the population is not as big as you think it would be, close to 700,000 people. But where their population is the surrounding areas, similar to Atlanta. Atlanta is actually pretty small, but the Atlanta metro area is huge. So the Clark County, where Las Vegas is from, is about 2.2 million. And then the Las Vegas metro is 2.4 million. So roughly same population as our region. They have within Clark County, they have 3 different EMS agencies, 2 private services, as well as 1 fire-based EMS agency in the next town over, which takes about 30 minutes to where our scene takes place. And they run about 140,000 calls a year, which is similar to Medic, who was at 160,000. And they have a primary fire department in Las Vegas Fire, and then the surrounding county and towns, Clark County Fire Department and North Las Vegas Fire Department could assist as mutual aid. They also have a level 1 trauma center. University Medical Center is about 15 minutes from the scene. Level 2 trauma center is Sunrise, which is about 20 minutes away. And then they have level 3's Nellis Air Force Base, which brings in its own intricacies of how do you get on base? Is that even allowed? Each county, each state has different rules on how you do that. And then other level 3's and level 2's and level 3's pediatric trauma centers are an option if needed. They also have multiple other hospitals that are non-trauma centers within Clark County. So there's not exactly the same, but a lot of similarities to Mecklenburg County and our region here. So this incident is not called the Las Vegas incident. It's not called the Harvest Festival incident. They just call it 1 October because it happened on October 1st of 2017 in Las Vegas. It was at the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival, and if you weren't aware of this, it's a gunman opened fire from the Mandalay Bay Resort down onto about 22,000 people that were enjoying a concert. And there were 61 fatalities, including the gunman, and about 867 injured. So I just wanted to pause. And Brian, when regardless of the circumstances, you hear this starting to go out, what are your first immediate thoughts other than, oh, crap?
Yeah, that's the first one. And we do a lot of incident command training, especially for our new crew chiefs that are coming up to lead ambulances, and even throughout our leadership. The first step in responding to or wrapping your head around something like this is just to breathe. It's going to be so much information coming in so quickly. Your first level of priority is trying to figure out what the scope of this is. Is this actually happening? Vetting intel is of primary importance, and that rang true throughout the Las Vegas after action, as well as the other 2 as well. So trying to find scope and then accountability of where your resources are so that you can start committing assets to where they're needed.
Great. All right. Then, Marissa, you get word, however, that there's a big event coming on where there's close to 1,000 casualties here. What is your first thoughts as somebody working in the emergency department?
Beyond oh crap would be, we need to start making space. We're going to get a lot of patients, and we don't have that space on a good day, let alone a normal day.
That's a reality. And space is a simple but often overlooked thing. Dr. Cunningham.
Hey, there are a couple things I'm doing on the front end, but first and foremost, I think I'm trying to identify that partner that I'm going to be working with throughout the entire incident, that we can start to establish a relationship early on to determine how we're going to work through this together. Because honestly, it's more than any one particular person is going to be able to do. And you want someone who's very familiar with your own facility and your own facility's capabilities. The second thing you have to have is some ascertation of what the truth actually is. Because you hear a report that, gunfire is opened at an event with 22,000 people. Your range of people could be from 0 to 22,000 is all you know. So until you sort that out, that's going to be really important, because I think this, the 1 October incident certainly highlights, some of the worst case of what you can see in terms of injuries. But, we've even had locally where there's been, a shooting. It's been a targeted shooting. You may have 1 or 2 individuals affected, even though it took place adjacent to a really large gathering of several thousand people. You need to know essentially what you're facing, what you need to be ready for, because if it is something like this, like you had in 1 October, you need to make sure you're activating and calling for resources early.
Yeah. So a common theme: facts, space, and resources. I think we'll see that a bunch. All right. So this is the opening, just to get the little pre-warning, the opening seconds, and maybe a couple minutes in, because there was actually a
Hey,
couple
Scott.
of yes, huh?
Hey, can I give you a little insight on this one?
Sure.
And this is a little bit of a personal take I can give you on this, just from having some interaction with this. Before you get you talk about like what is the view and what do you have from a trauma standpoint before these things happen. The answer's none most of the time. And I can tell you this because I was actually on the phone with the trauma attending on call in Las Vegas as this event happened. He's a really good friend of mine. We've been friends for years. And we happen to have a tradition where we catch up on Sundays to talk about our favorite football teams, right? And he'll like rib me about my team because my team is awful. And we're cheering his team because they're doing a little bit better. But we actually were catching up on, in the afternoon on Sunday before football kicked off here. And we're determining, hey, how's it going for the day? How are the teams doing? I think our general catch up for a few minutes. And he happened to be on call. And as we were discussing things, he said, hey, hold on. I just got a trauma page. Something funny's going on. I got to go. And next thing they're cutting into game coverage and everything for updates, news breaks on what's happening with my friends. So very interesting. He had like zero notice on this. And I'll tell you, very early into practice, it's thrust into this.
Wow. That's crazy. All right. So that changes things a little bit, I think. Initially, there was a couple of warning shots from what I've heard and read, and just kind of potentially like gauging distance and trajectory and such. And then it started off like that people thought it was fireworks, and so rapid fire. But it'd be hard to not have casualties, given that. And hopefully the sound worked for you guys to hear the rapid fire that was going on. But you see you hear that and see that, and that changes everything. And so not only do you have the potential ballistics injuries, but also other injuries like tramples and stuff like that too. So you can see the chaos that ensued from there. Oops, hang on again, sorry. All right. So a quick timeline. And so at approximately 10:05 p.m., the first shots were fired. And then about a minute later, the first potential sign of trouble taking place was the first 911 call, and then initial radio traffic from local PD. And then about 7 minutes later, the first incident command post was set up by Clark County Fire Department. And then throughout, 5 minutes later, the first triage area was established. 4 minutes later, a secondary triage location was established, which this is a massive event, a massive site, and people were scattering, as you saw. And so of note, at the same time as the triage being established, the first victims started arriving at the hospitals. So that's kind of interesting that people don't think about that. Oh, wait a minute. The help is at the scene. They respond to the scene, but patients are already arriving to the hospitals. And so that kind of changes things. And so we'll talk about this more later, but the first notice a hospital might get might be the patient showing up on their own. So we need to keep that in mind. And then a few minutes after that is when they actually start getting actual treatment areas set up at the scene. And then a second hospital, University Medical Center, starts getting their patients a minute later after that. So again, there's not, at least from what I could find, a exact noted time of when the first EMS transport took place, but from all takes, it appears that patients started showing up prior to any of that taking place at the hospitals. And so this is a long timeline of over 12 hours, and it just stretches out. Just want to give everybody a little bit of a taste of the timeline of, especially with those first patients showing up. So the Las Vegas by the numbers, there were 61 fatalities total, 31 including the gunmen that were pronounced on scene. 27 later died at various hospitals. There was one death 6 months later from a complication from one of the leg wounds. And then 2 years later, unfortunately, there was a suicide related to it that they ruled that was a direct cause from the incident itself. 867 injured people, with 413, almost half of those with penetrating wounds, either from gunshots or shrapnel injuries. Out of those, 285 EMS transports. I'm not sure the exact ratio of the fatalities that were at the hospital versus just injuries, but that's about so roughly a third of our patients were transported by EMS. And so that's another big point to point out of like we're finding more and more that our patients are not arriving by EMS when it comes to a mass casualty incident. So we need to be prepared when it comes to that, to be able to respond without having adequate notice to our patients. And then divvying up, our primary hospitals were Sunrise, which is I believe was a level 2 trauma center. They got the majority of patients. And University Medical Center was 104 patients. They're a level 1 trauma center. University Medical Center is actually slightly closer than Sunrise. However, due to the location of the event, there's an interstate in between them. Patients were kind of scattered in the direction of Sunrise. So I think that kind of dictated where the patient flow went to, and then spread throughout the different hospitals around the city. But you will note also the last two are kind of odd. They don't fit in. University of California, Irvine, and Loma Linda Medical Center. They're in California. That makes no sense, but it also makes you think of, you never know where these patients are going to go. They probably hopped in their car, got on the interstate, and drove home, not realizing what their injuries were. And so you never know where you are and what's going to show up. So just be aware of those kind of things. So looking at, I call them hurdles. Hurdles because it's an obstruction, but we were able to get over them. So some potential difficulties that they experienced with the pre-hospital response on scene and trying to get patients to the hospital. So there was not a unified command as part of the music event. So Brian, briefly, what is unified command and how would that help, or how could this potentially help in such a large incident like this, where we have EMS, we have fire, we have police, we have federal entities, we have the hospitals, and there's event staff on scene. How would a unified command help a large event like this?
It facilitates one of the most important things when you start dealing with major incidents is communication. If you have all the decision makers for the respective agencies and disciplines in the same place, receiving the same information with real-time ability to vet the accuracy of that information, it just makes things move faster. We practice this routinely, all the way from initial planning meetings all the way through day of, or the multi-day execution of events, is we have all partners in one location, even at multiple layers. And I don't want to steal the focus, but you're talking about patients showing up at other hospitals without EMS. I mean, that's a huge reminder of the geographic effect. We talked about it in DMEP just the other week. I mean, we run into this routinely. I mean, we host the Love and Life Music Festival every year with 80,000 plus attendance over 3 days. And Atrium Maine and Mercy and Novant Presbyterian are all well read into that, the planning and the fact that that's gone live and that it's coming, so that we all have time to prepare. But Unified Command is just, it's an essential piece to events, not just incidents that occur that you aren't preparing for. But if you've got something that's scheduled, you have got to have all of your partners and all agencies that are represented on that footprint in one spot, so you can make decisions together.
Totally. So communication is key. It's that kind of leads to our next one of local responders were not even aware of the event. The closest fire station to this event, they were not notified of this, and just happened to be that the off-going fire captain had noticed the event. Was like, oh, that's kind of odd, and also passed on that information to the oncoming fire captain, just for general awareness. And so, Brian, what do you think about to what level should your on-duty teams be aware of what's going on?
Oh, 100%, 100%. We've even experienced this in Charlotte. You go back, I think it's been 3 years now, but the Battle of the Bands, the marching band competition that occurred at Memorial Stadium 3 years ago, none of us knew anything about it. And there were 9,000 people attending from various states all over the U.S. And we ended up taking 28 heat casualty patients, but we had no pre-warning. The only service that was contracted or made aware of that event was law enforcement for security and parking assistance. But fire and EMS had no clue that it was even there. So it is absolutely imperative that not just those that are working the event, but all of those who are on duty or potentially available for callback understand what's happening in their response area.
Right. So one of the things that came out of it was that we always hope for the best, but we don't always prepare for the worst. That given the amount of people that were present at this event, there wasn't near enough supplies. How do we factor that in? How do you to what extent should we be prepared for a big event, do you think, not knowing what might or might not happen?
Yeah, it's a moving target. We take data. Obviously, we've got 2 years under our belt from the music festival and kind of understand what our routine supply consumption is and what our type of patients are. But we do prepare for the worst. Locally here at Medic over the last 2 years with an initiative supported by emergency management in the UASI division, or excuse me, the Rossi region, have begun deploying active violence response kits. And it's on, there's one in every one of our UTVs, there's one on all of our command staff, and there's multiple in our mass casualty response equipment truck. So that allows us to mobilize supplies and equipment out into the field. But it's very difficult to predict. And then you have to take into account the other piece of it, the financial piece. You have to justify when you start throwing hundreds or thousands of tourniquets into a footprint that may or may not be used. And I hate to even bring that up, but it's a reality as things get more expensive. But definitely using history. We do a lot of intel work with prior cities. If new events are coming into the city of Charlotte, what did those locations and venues see as far as patient counts and types of injuries or illnesses that we should expect and be prepared for, and we try to adapt for those.
Excellent. Yeah, everything expires, unfortunately. And then the first arriving fire department unit did say, "Oh goodness, I need help. Send me more units," which is one of the most crucial things. Tell me what you got and what you need. But they found that they did not establish a command. So yes, get me help, but they need direction. And they didn't designate a staging area. So those units could really go anywhere. So what would be the first thing that you need to do if you have a big event like this to make sure you have that good span of control, Brian?
Yeah, so the way that we operate in here locally for mass gathering events, and I see Josh commented in the chat that the threshold for special ops response in Clark County was 25,000 attendees. We have a very similar plan here in Charlotte. It's 20,000 gets an emergency operations center activation, gets an incident action plan built, and then all parties that are responsible for some aspect of covering that event are in-house, in unified command, in the emergency operations center, and are all part of the planning. So we actually deployed an active violence incident command quick reference guide that is in every ambulance, as well as with all of our command staff, and to help our people stay connected to marching themselves through it in a an incident of high stress. Having checklists or reminders to march ourselves through that is supremely helpful. And one of the very first things is establish a unified command post with our law enforcement partners and first responders like the fire department, regardless of whether we're in the city or operating in the county.
Right. People are coming to help, but they need to know how to help. So establishing that command, even if it's only temporary and it's handed off to somebody else, is crucial. And then there was poor accountability regarding the number of patients and to which hospitals they were transported. So with that number of patients, Brian, how do you keep track of them?
Yeah, that's a bigger question than just, looking at after actions. I mean, we just went through a multi-state, multi-agency active violence training exercise over a couple of days at Carowinds, and that was a huge hurdle. We finally had the opportunity to practice transport. We had all the hospital systems involved to actually receive patients, but tracking patients, even in a controlled scenario exercise, is difficult. The start triage tags that we use and are used pretty widely in our UASI region have a tearaway piece that goes to the transport officer. We don't routinely drill it. I mean, I'll be transparent with that. We don't routinely drill it. We are very good at, I mean, and this is not just medic, this is EMS as an industry. We're very good at triage. Our first responders are very good at triage. We can triage very well, and then we can treat people very well. But tracking patients is very difficult because you want to expedite transport as fast as you can, but you've got to collect information. So we're working on some new methods to try to do that. We use an MCI command board at this point at our transportation officer section, and it's getting antiquated. So we're trying to leverage some technology and evaluate some new options to better track patients. And then how does that link back to our hospital partners and help us vet that patient list at the end of an incident?
Great. Thanks, Brian. So the idea of a lot of hospitals will say, all right, here's what we can do on a normal day, and we'll have surge capacity of about 20%. And that's assuming that normal operations take place when it comes to things like triage and transport and distributing patients across the entire system, not just one hospital. But and those facts came out of the official AAR from Las Vegas that came from the Hospital Association for Nevada. The thing is, though, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, according to Mike Tyson. So what happens when our plan goes out the window and our incident doesn't follow the script? Marissa, how would your team handle all these patients just showing up and no notice?
So the no notice is always going to be the most difficult part whenever something like this happens. Obviously, the most notice that we can get from EMS or for anybody with that one source of truth, it's going to help us prepare ages on the front end as opposed to trying to play catch up on the back end. But once we start seeing these patients arrive POV and you start to realize, hey, there's like a lot of people with the same complaints, and I've gotten 5, 6, they don't all come at once. They trickle in, but that trickle starts to become stronger and stronger. And the next thing you know, you've got a front waiting room full of 50 people who all have some kind of traumatic injury and all came from the same place. And you're like, oh, this might be related. We should fix that. So you stand up your hospital incident command. They'll call the person who notices it, which in this case would be your triage nurse, would notice that this is happening, would tell the charge nurse, and then that relays itself up to hospital incident command, which hospital incident command will then set itself up to start bringing in resources, bringing in the extra people that are needed, bringing in all of the parties, contacting trauma, which they would definitely know by now. But as soon as we know, they know. But letting trauma know, hey, something weird's going on. We need somebody down here. And this is something we actually trialed with the UASI drill with Dr. Cunningham, of having a forward deployed trauma surgeon come down and help figure out who's going to the OR and who isn't based on resources. So the first thing our people are going to do is going to be start treating the patients and rely very heavily on that incident command and their leadership to start moving the pieces, because with this many patients that just show up, the ED nurse does not have time to figure out anything else besides these people are bleeding, these people are dying, I need to do what I can to fix them, and then trust that leadership's handling it on the other side.
Great, thank you. So our next little note from the AAR from Las Vegas was that hospitals should know that they may or may not get patients. They may or may not get overwhelmed. It's all proportional to the distance from the scene itself. A lot of times we try to not do that. We try to distribute patients appropriately and evenly. But a lot of times it's going to be the closest hospital that just, whether it's by EMS or POV access, or in the Las Vegas incident, the fact that there was a barrier, the interstate was in the way, directed patients to the next closest hospital. So things like that, they don't always go according to plan. So Brian, what would be a normal pie in the sky distribution of patients?
Our plan is to early notification to the hospitals that we have some sort of incident that's creating mass casualties, right? So if I go from my worst case scenario and I'm at the music festival and I start taking lots of casualties from some incident similar to Las Vegas, we have communications personnel in the unified command post that are managing the incident in real time. So it's as simple as sending a message back to our home communication center, get that information disseminated to all county hospitals, and start looking at their capacity. So it provides two things. So we can start giving them a heads up of, hey, you need to start decompressing, but I also need to understand what capacity you have. And then we'll put that into play when we start actually doing transports. Now, we can't control the ones who go POV, and looking at 800 plus patients, there's no way that anybody can control that flow of patients. We will control the ones that we can, and then staying in contact with our hospital partners to see what's changed and if their capacity's changed, and then adapt if we need to.
Great. Dr. Cunningham, I saw you start to say something.
Yeah, I was going to keep in mind, we're focusing on hospitals and hospital response here, but a lot of times when patients are coming, by private vehicle or foot or otherwise, they're going to go to what they believe is the closest healthcare facility, right? So oftentimes, whether that is an actual hospital, is kind of irrelevant, right? Because people will not necessarily recognize that. They're going to follow signage. They're going to follow signs that say ER. And particularly locally, in many markets now, we have a tendency to have freestanding EDs present, or we'll have urgent cares crop up and have signs that are designed to attract business to those areas. And they will attract business to those areas in mass casualty incidents as well. So, it does kind of distract people, and they will go all over the place. So it's something to keep in mind. You start talking about policy for how you're going to design your infrastructure and why signage and everything is important.
Right. Absolutely true. We find that in other areas too, especially with drop-offs or urgent cares for a variety of complaints. Marissa?
I'll just add on. So one of my ERs is the freestanding ED South Park, which is very much its own little island. But when I teach them mass casualty and what to do in that circumstance, I like to remind them that just because they're not a trauma hospital doesn't mean they're not going to get trauma patients. Patients don't care that you're not a trauma hospital. They don't care that you're freestanding and you have no extra help. They see the sign on the door, they see the atrium sign, they see the Novant sign, or they go, hey, I remember I brought my uncles, sisters, brothers to that urgent care one day. So I'm going to go there because people might not be going there. So it'll be faster. They're going to go wherever they think that they will get care the fastest and can get to the easiest. It doesn't matter. They don't care who you are and what services you typically provide.
Great. So looking now into more of the hospital response, the first thing that University Medical Center did was they started lining up beds and bags of fluids. So speaking of space and resources for those patients. So we have to know who the patients are. Patient registration can be a headache. Marissa, how do we get through that? We don't have capacity for 10,000 patients.
No, we don't. Especially not if we're trying to use the EMR to track these patients. Our current setup does not allow for 800 patient influx of tracking. We have ways of tracking patients that don't go through on your electronic health record, which does cause some of those bottlenecks on the back end, because now, I've got this patient and they're under a no name or a trauma name or a disaster name, but that's not their real name. So when you look at family reunification and how to match these people up with who they belong to, there's going to be a big discrepancy until you can get everything fixed back together. But in the meantime, the fastest way we found to do it is by using the smart triage tags that the county uses, every local hospital has, everybody in the UASI region uses. And they have a number on that next to the barcode that is unique to that tag. So that number can get put in the EMR in the back end so that we can associate it with their medical record number so they can drag it through. So that way they can track it all the way through. And that's the best way we found to do it, along with our paper charting, similar to how we did our trauma I'll say back in the day. It wasn't that long ago. But how we do our paper trauma charting works very well.
Perfect. So, I think the simplest thing might be the easiest thing, paper charting, to keep track of people. The OR, Dr. Cunningham, one hospital, I believe it was University Medical Center, treated 124 gunshot wounds in that first 24 hours. So it may not be physical bed space, but the ability to actually move those patients in and out of the OR. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's important. And this is a little bit of a different incident, right? And this gets down to why the details of the event matter and the injuries people are presenting with matter. If this were, a different type of MCI with an exposure or things along those lines, you may not need an OR at all. This one, particular in setting of penetrating trauma, was extremely intensive on the ORs. I think this is where your triage comes down to it. If you take a typical night in trauma at any trauma center across this country, things that you're typically going to take to OR emergently are suddenly not going to be an emergent in this situation. I think it's really imperative to get your staff to retrain and rethink on what truly is emergent that needs to go right now in staging that. And that sometimes that even means some of your high acuity stuff that's coming in is not going to survive. And it's really difficult to say, hey, we're going to tag this patient black. I think sometimes you'll get to that, maybe a couple of the other scenarios later we had to mention that in some after action reviews they had, that it created an uprising at the scene when someone that was a little more high profile was tagged as black. People at the scene disagreed with it, and it caused almost a secondary incident. So keep in mind that's going to be really difficult to do, but your staging of what is important and what needs to go right now really does change. Life over limb, right? And a lot of these things that would be emergent things we're taking to the OR for revascularization of a limb. It's just not happening. Certainly not with 124 patients showing up. So that's a really difficult thing to make the call on. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is where I said it's really important early on, 1 October is really important. Determine who your partner is with all this, right? Because I can tell you as a surgeon, I'm not going to be running the response to this, right? There's a specific skill set your surgeons have that we're going to be put to work in the OR, right? There are certain things we can do there. That's where our skill set is needed. We're going to be operative surgeons in this setting. The triage is going to come down to someone that is a non-surgeon. So making sure they know and you have the ability to back them up in their decision-making of what actually needs to come to the OR versus doesn't need to come to the OR is going to be really important. And oftentimes that's going to be established over years of relationships. So finding your counterpart that does something different than you, that's going to be there throughout the duration of the event, is very important. And this is why.
Totally. So two areas that we don't really think about, they're kind of unsung heroes in all of our industries. Environmental services, like we can't do stuff unless the stuff is clean. And they allow us to move on to that next patient. And so how do we take care of these rooms, these beds, these ORs, if we don't have enough teams and staff to be able to make this possible? Same thing with supply chain. We live in a just-in-time society now where anything is available by 2 days, 3 days with Amazon. We don't no longer stock weeks worth of supplies of things. So we may find that these are limited. There's only so many things in my code car, only so many things in my ambulance before I need to be able to restock. And we don't have these, we may not have the ability to do these things. So what do we do? Open that to anybody.
Typically the best you have with what you've got for the most amount of people. You take what you can and work on getting more, but until then you've got what you got.
I think it goes to, the Doug was talking about, and we covered in DMAP, is acceptable standard of care. What we do in major events or mass casualty is not the same that we do every day. We have to prioritize life-saving measures only. Not just to save supplies, but those are the people that we can actually make a difference on. So are we going to start a bunch of IVs on patients with penetrating trauma who are otherwise stable? Yeah, probably not. But that's also not what the hospital is used to receiving. So it's understanding and having those who are going to respond to or mitigate incidents like this understand what the acceptable level of care is or standard of care is in a mass casualty incident.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I cannot reinforce that enough. The other thing you'll get when you drill this is very important, is that without it being an MCI, people would zip into places and kind of beg, borrow, and steal what they need, right? Out of necessity on their daily job. So when it hits an MCI, and maybe you run out of certain supply, you'll go to where you know it is, right? So you might go take it from a place that also needs that resource. Suddenly it's leaving them short, and that loss gets distributed across everything, and nobody really knows where anything is. Whereas in MCI, it's really important. If you run out of something, have a need, you have to communicate that back to your area leader and up the chain for incident command, because there's a whole logistics group working to get you the supplies that you need. It needs to come funnel down through. Otherwise, you're going to be stealing from other people that have that supply that also need that supply. So very, very important. And the way to break that habit is to drill and see that it's happening. You have to break that cycle.
Totally. So we've come to Brian kind of mentioned this a second ago. We've come to expect certain things. The patient arrives to the hospital with a bow tie on or a bow on them, all packaged up and ready to go. But this didn't happen because of just the mass and the proximity and such. So we expect our patients to be triaged, and we know what's sick versus not sick prior to them arrival. But that didn't happen because the hospital had to figure that out. So Marissa, is the ED capable of triaging 300 patients that are showing up?
Capable, yes. The time in which it's done is going to vary, but this is something that we have worked on very diligently with our nurses and all of our staff on this triage and how it differs from their normal triage, and how their report and patients will look different than they will when they come in for a normal day from EMS. They're not going to have that pretty package, bow tie, everything's done. Here's your nice long report, everything you need to know. Here's their allergies. You're going to get a very fast, if anything, 1, 2, 3, done and move. And so working with them on this triage needs to take less than 30 seconds. This needs to be as fast as humanly possible. And we don't have time to second guess. You're going to do it and you're going to move on because you don't have time. You have 2 more people, and the longer you take, that means that's 1 more person that you're not going to get to see.
Perfect. Thanks. And then speaking of triage, Dr. Cunningham, what do you think about this first bullet point of, I guess, essentially surgical triage in the ED?
Yeah, it depends on what it is. I mean, there are plenty of mass casualty incidents we have that don't have any surgical needs at all. All right. Your trauma surgeons are cross-trained, critical care in most facilities as well. So, there is some expertise you can put them to in other ways aside from surgery. So still helpful to have that trauma team involvement, but a lot of MCIs, they just don't have an immediate surgical need. And it's okay to have a non-surgeon doing triage. Matter of fact, I think in an incident like 1st October, you probably had non-surgeons doing triage at some point just because all your surgeons are tied up, and you have to just acknowledge that is going to be a shortage, right? So putting someone out front that and you worked with it before that has some expertise of what is an actual emergency and what is not, it's important. So, and we have plenty of experts, both in emergency medicine and nursing, that have tons of experience of, working as part of the team with our patients. They're going to be able to do this. And I think that's a really difficult thing across the board for anybody on this call, is to understand that you are expert in your area, but there are also experts in managing incident command that can help manage the events unfolding in a way that frees you up to handle the areas where you're expert, right? So, that might be everything. So say it was a major burn incident, right? We only have so many people are going to be able to manage burn acutely in terms of surgical care related to burn. But lots of people can help facilitate all the logistics of getting everything in place, whether it be resources, supplies, patients to where they need to go, working on transferring patients to appropriate burn centers. There are plenty of people who are capable of doing this, and having your staff go through courses like a DMAP or incident command training is extremely important, and this is where it pays off.
Perfect. So we might have to sometimes think outside the box, go outside our normal typical patient care flow to see what works best. And that's what the hospitals did in Vegas. They also looked at, I'm just going to browse over this, calling in their specialty teams, cardiothoracic surgeons, vascular surgeons, neurosurgeons. And if they didn't have other traumatic injuries, they would just went straight to that neurosurgery OR or that vascular OR. Maybe they didn't need the trauma surgeon for that patient. So they let them do their things.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of a double-edged sword. You have some of these things, it's wonderful to have those teams help. Typically what you're going to have are the subspecialty surgeons co-scrubbing with one of the trauma surgeons if available, or one of the general surgeons if available. Because oftentimes what will happen is just through practice and defaulting back to your typical clinical care that you provide, a lot of it isn't time-dependent injury, right? So cases will run too long, things that are emergencies, in subspecialist world are not necessarily emergencies in an MCI setting. So keeping that in mind is really important. The other thing that I will tell people that's usually helpful, the shortage usually isn't operative surgeons. The shortage is usually the teams that go with us. And I will tell you right off the get-go, I cannot operate without my team, right? It doesn't happen. I can't go to an OR by myself and perform surgery on a patient. That doesn't happen. So the typical shortage is it's your team that's there. So you might be operating with an orthopedic team, you might be operating with a neurosurgical team, you might have the heart team, right? So staging those teams for the injuries they're going to receive will help facilitate things. But oftentimes you're going to have multiple specialists involved with the care of those patients, and pushing that through in a way that's time dependent is going to be important. But it's really that team that is kind of that true scarce resource.
Yep. So speaking of resources, and everybody is experiencing critical resource shortages. So things that you normally have plenty of, you're going to run out of. So you're going to have to ration those or triage the actual need for those, or find alternative uses for them. Even things as simple as clean linens. They were having to change linens 4 to 6 times per hour per bed. And where do we get stuff like that from? And even things you only think of like clerical stuff like ballpoint pens and other documentation materials that we normally on a normal day have plenty of, but we don't in this case. So we have to be aware of all the different things that we normally have that we may not have.
Yeah, and I think this is important too, Scott, to put on there. If you go back to 1 October, I guarantee you they were talking about linen changes per bed. They didn't have beds for everybody. I mean, that's the reality of this situation. And some of the things that are taken emergently, if you can take that patient there in a wheelchair, that's probably the best thing to do, to get them there in a wheelchair and just get those patients where they need to go for their care. I guarantee they're not sitting on 400 extra beds.
True. And then the OR turnover optimization. And so it's doing just barely what was just only what was needed right then to get them through to their next operation and then move on to the next person. And so only doing true damage control surgery, keep them alive, and then move on to the next person. All right. So also the most effective resources sharing actually occurred through direct facility to facility communication, bypassing the normal bureaucratic channels. They picked up the phone and called the next hospital and said, "Hey, what do you have? What can you send us?" As opposed to doing the ordering and such. So they got creative. They called their LTACs. There's a rehab hospital attached to CMC. What can we use from there that they can spare? There's an ortho hospital attached to Novant. What can they snag from there? Down in Pineville, there's an LTAC attached to well, not attached, but next to their hospital. So be thinking about different things that we could be able to potentially use, and that's what they did, and that's what worked for them. Also, is their plan to say, hey, if there's fire department available, can they be kind of our help us with the triage and moving patients from cars or from wherever they may be? So be thinking of different alternative definitions or job descriptions for people.
I will say with that too, you want to make sure you don't rob Peter to pay Paul, like Dr. Cunningham was talking about earlier. Yes, you can get creative and see who can help you, but you don't want to make sure that you're not taking chest tube trays from the OR or somebody who's going to need that downstream, because you're just prolonging the problem.
Steal from a different hospital, not your hospital. So Brian mentioned this earlier. So you stole that from me. Could this happen here in the Charlotte area? Yeah, we have the Loving Life Festival. There it is. It's the exact same setting. And so anything's possible. So just be aware of things like that. All right. So moving on to our next one, we're going to be short on time, but we're going to keep on going. So if you need to leave, except from our speakers, they can't leave. But Orlando, I'll just briefly say this, that it's similar. They have similar size cities, similar or county. They have similar number of trauma centers and similar responders to their incidents. So the Pulse nightclub is a club in Orlando where a gunman opened fire inside the club and then barricaded himself and others, with 49 fatalities and 66 injured at this event. And this is a body cam from a police officer.
At 2:07, roughly 6 minutes after he started shooting, police entered the building with guns drawn. As they search inside for Mateen, they are seen stepping over victims.
Yes, get outside, get outside.
And evacuating as many who are still alive as possible. If you can move, you need to leave. By 2:37, survivors can be seen climbing out of the building as law enforcement continues to enter the club.
And here's another video.
Officer James Hyland arrived in his personal pickup truck, which was quickly turned into a makeshift ambulance by his partner.
We didn't have any ambulances or anything there. He just started loading people up, and he just jumped in the truck, and I left it unlocked, and he was just going back and forth, doing one run after another, after another, after.
Officer James.
So I included that last video to just an example of people are going to make use of what they have available to get to the hospital, to get to help. And so a police officer used his off-duty truck and started loading up patients, and they went to the hospital. So timeline, kind of the point of this being there's a lot of things going on, but the first gunshots were heard at 2:02 a.m. And then 8 minutes later, the first patient arrived to the closest hospital, Orlando Regional Medical Center, which is actually only about 3 blocks away from this incident. So that alters a lot of things with its proximity to it. So that was before technically any first responders, not counting police, arrived on scene. So just trying to emphasize that whole, hey, your first warning might be the patient showing up at your front door. And so some things that complicated this response was the proximity. There's a fire station literally across the street, I think it was, and they were in the hot zone, and there was potential additional shooters and rumors about things like that, and lockdowns that were prohibiting immediate response that kind of delayed some of the response to this. But the point being that it takes time for the correct resources to get in place, and these patients are just going to start showing up no notice. So by the numbers, there were 50 killed, 41 died in the club, and 9 died after arrival to the hospital. 58 wounded, with 41 victims coming to one hospital, the closest trauma center, Orlando Regional, with 17 victims taken to Florida Hospital Orlando. And there are a few reports saying that there's other hospitals involved. I just couldn't get exact accurate numbers for those. So on the fatalities at the scene, there was an average of 6.9 wounds per patient, and 90% had gunshots to their extremity, a good number to the chest, and about half to the abdomen or pelvis, and some about a third were headshots. About a third of them had potentially survivable wounds. And so perhaps if we were able to get to them quicker, we're able to apply things like tourniquets, there may have been a decrease in the number of fatalities, because there was no documented tourniquets or wound care for these patients. So kind of like a what ifs part of the situation, but that might be a call for more public education for wound care that could potentially help in the future. And so moving on, some of the hurdles in the pre-hospital side of things. It was difficult to respond to. So Brian, how do we respond to briefly in like a violent active scene where we don't know what's going on, and there's multiple alerts going out, and how do we take care of these patients that are still in the hot zone?
Yeah, it's difficult. Here locally, we don't have body armor. It's a point of contention and has been for several years, but that's just the fact. We don't deploy body armor for our medics. We are fortunate in our collaboration with Charlotte Fire Department and their work independently with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, as the city's fire department does deploy rescue task forces that are fully armored and do train downrange in hot zones with CMPD. We're further fortunate that CMPD is very well bought into and equipped themselves to support the Stop the Bleed campaign. Every officer carries at least one tourniquet on them, and they are not scared to use it for a victim. Several of them carry additional Stop the Bleed kits in their patrol cars. So we have a lot of pieces in play, but yes, looking at EMS response into this, we're going to end up staging. And then we stress to our people that, we want you to be safe, but everyone has to evaluate their own threshold of safety. So what risks are you willing to take? How close are you willing to go so that we can care for patients? But it's tough when something like this is still active and unfolding until we get some sort of control over it.
And that's what happened here is that they weren't able to truly respond like they normally would. And then there were some ballistic vests available to some units. However, there wasn't a actual policy in place on proper and appropriate use and training for such. So there was a little bit of some difficulties with that. Speaking of communication again, there was different command posts. There doesn't appear to have been, at least not initially, a unified command post. So communications were limited. So going back to Brian's point earlier about having a good unified command so that we can speak to each other is definitely going to be crucial. And speaking of also of being able to track our patients, because of that hot zone and the proximity to the hospital, Orlando PD transported 15 patients, but we had technically no idea where they went. We know where they went. They went to the hospital, to Orlando Regional, but if a non-traditional transport unit transports patients, it can make it difficult to track them. And so you can kind of put that in the category of those POV patients where they just show up. But we might need to think about that and plan for things like that in the future of maybe trying to somehow document that. And we keep saying this, that it was difficult to access many of the patients due to the active scene. And so many were, once they were able to make entry into the building, many were just carried out by officers over to a triage area. So we may see patients in a different setting than normal. So when it comes to the hospital response, MCI notifications to staff were done by cell phone, telephone, not necessarily telephone tree, just picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, I need you here." Does that work, Dr. Cunningham? How do you call on your partners?
Yeah, so we actually, because of the ability to say what you need is determined not just by activating an MCI, but by a little bit of triage and inside information on that. We have multiple layers of backup coverage available. So you might get one or two with an MCI that's going to get notified. But even if we receive an MCI alert, oftentimes we're waiting for a phone call to tell us, hey, what do we need to do, or where do we need to be to assist? And that's really important, because just a thing saying, hey, we got a level 1 activation coming. Great. Like, I know I'm coming, but you don't know what you're walking into. If you have a little bit of heads up, you can plan for that accordingly. So for us, we do via a cell phone. We have a phone tree, a whole process we can activate. For us, it's been reliable. We've tested it, had a pretty robust response. So I was actually really surprised at how well that works. Versus a trigger that's maybe like a different system or an app or something that you have to keep up continually and hope that it's going to work.
Marissa, they experienced something that your team experienced about I think it's 2 years ago now, where because of the lockdowns and police perimeters, that additional team members had difficulty getting to the hospital to help. Have y'all gotten through this for future events?
Yeah, so that was something that we dealt with during the Marshall incident back that April. Was they shut down roads, they shut down access to the hospitals, and our teammates weren't able to get to work to help. And it was hard to identify who worked in the ER or who needed to be there versus people who were just trying to get in or trying to get out. So what we've ended up doing is partnering really closely with CMPD and our local law enforcement to help identify what on the badges, like if your badge is always going to be your key to get into almost anywhere in the hospital for where you need to be, not just like anywhere. But so where on your badge do they need to look to see very quickly, oh, this says emergency department, you have the red ED staff badge, and being able to prove, hey, I need to work here, and then coming up with predetermined access points. Staff go through this road to get in because this is going to be the staff access. You're still going to get extra people coming in, but CMPD or whatever law enforcement is there knows to let you through, and making that liaison position role between public safety and law enforcement to help that communication.
Perfect.
Hey, Scott, really quick, I see you're rolling through the slides. The last thing you just ran up about the ED quickly running out of items like chest tubes and Pleurovacs. Having sat through multiple lectures and debriefs and everything on the Pulse Nightclub shooting, I would say that is one of the big takeaways that came from the Pulse Nightclub shooting, was staging out supply cabinets ahead of time with appropriate resources became a really big item across the country right after this. They had actually just drilled, if I remember right, it was like within the week or within 2 weeks before this, had done an MCI drill and had large color-coded chests, like rolling cabinets they could reel out with supplies. and that was cited as like a huge help. There was, if I remember right, there was something like where they didn't have access or they weren't staged appropriately, so they changed that. But they'd actually put thought into creating these kits ahead of time and having these additional supplies, like to their credit, of the institution in Orlando. And it just needed some tweaking, but that became a big item for trauma centers after the Pulse nightclub shooting. Was, do we need to have these carts? We had trauma carts that are readily available to wheel out. Specifically, like chest tubes is the big thing that was on everyone's like, gosh, we need like a cart with like 1,000 chest tubes in it. Like everybody was pushing for this as like the big talking point coming out. But again, staging of your equipment in a way that you can actually access when it's time and people know how to access is really important.
Excellent. So thinking ahead to have those resources available. Same thing with how do you deal with all these John Does. So you having your trauma packs or those disaster packs ready to go, so you can at least track them, and communication when possible with EMS about those patients they're bringing in. So again, honing on the number of procedures that are done and being able to actually accommodate those. And so how do you do those? How do you keep up with those? Choosing what's more elective, what is more emergent, what's more damage control. And then also, are you able to dedicate the OR space, the OR teams, as Dr. Cunningham mentioned earlier, to what is truly needed for this? So that could be complicated. So one thing that Orlando Regional did was they had two of their partner hospitals. They said, "Hey, you're not getting hit by this. Lucky you. Can you send us help?" So they actually had teams come in from their other hospitals to help expand what they were able to offer to their patients because they were already there. And so that was an interesting thing to do. And then also the trauma surgeons, they just essentially stayed in their OR suites and they brought the patients to them. I'm not sure logistically how that would happen, but it makes sense. It's less downtime that you have. You're able to just do a revolving door for your patients. They also called in their subspecialist. They also used other units, that non-traditional units, the other ICUs, the step down units, to try to create more space. They triage those patients. Are you really sick, and you need to stay, or are you just kind of sick, and we can maybe move you out temporarily to create more space? They also use non-traditional providers, the MICU folks, to say, hey, can you help us manage this to keep our trauma surgeons free to keep on doing their surgeries that are required? So maybe using some alternative pathways for patients. And so could this happen here? This is just a quick Google search of bar and club shootings that have happened in Charlotte this year so far. So all these were thankfully fairly minimal, but it's just a short way away from that same thing happening here in the Charlotte area. All right. So moving on to New Orleans. And so again, similar layout to or response matrix and population as we have in our region. So the Bourbon Street vehicle attack was in New Orleans on Bourbon Street, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. It was after about 3 a.m. on New Year's Day, technically, where a subject drove their pickup truck down Bourbon Street and then hitting a lot of people, and then had an exchange of gunfire with law enforcement, totaling with 15 fatalities and 57 injured. So that a blunt injuries like that is a whole different ballgame. It's different injury types. This particular vehicle was an electric vehicle, so it was quiet. It's also able to speed up much quicker than a traditional gas engine, and so that changes the dynamics of things. People aren't able to prepare for impact. They don't know it's coming, as well as the velocity is tremendously higher. So the timeline, there's not a ton of, I couldn't find a ton of information from New Orleans. At least it's not as much as from the previous reports, so I don't have as much information. But I do know it happened quickly. Everything happened quickly, and it may be a testament to their preparation. They're always dealing with Bourbon Street and Mardi Gras and such. But at 3:15 a.m. is when the pickup truck went through around the barriers. And there happened to be actually an ambulance across the street from the entrance that saw it happening, and they started got the wheels in motion. And then just 2 minutes later is when it ended, where he wrecked into a lift, and then exchanged gunfire with police officers. Then about 15 minutes later is when the official MCI notification went out, and then within 95 minutes, everybody has at the hospital. So that's actually pretty good for that number of patients to get them there. So total, there was 71 total patients, 11 fatalities at the scene, including the perpetrator, 3 fatalities at the hospital after transport, and 45 survivors, 29 transported by EMS. So still, there's a good, 40-ish people who made it to the hospital by non-traditional means. University Medical Center received the vast majority of them, 26 of which within the first few minutes. So they just got slammed out of nowhere with all these patients. And then other hospitals also received patients. So it's just because you're the closest doesn't mean you're always going to get all the patients. And so I mentioned earlier that these types of vehicles can have increased mass, increased damage with those acceleration. There's not the typical hit the brakes before impact. It's purposeful, so they're going to continue accelerating through these incidents that will increase the severity of these injuries and blunt trauma, as opposed to what we talked about previously, the penetrating trauma. The penetrating trauma that did take place was a result of that gunfight at the very end, where 2 officers received gunshot wounds in addition to the perpetrator, who was pronounced on scene. So on the pre-hospital side of things, Dr. Cunningham mentioned this earlier. When you're responding to the scene and you're having to triage patients and you're pronouncing people dead, they actually found that there was anger by police and bystanders or family who were there trying to help their family, their friends, but they were just black tagged by EMS, and so that caused some issues. I don't know how to address that other than it's part of it. Brian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's going to be difficult because, I mean, we always want to save as many people as possible, but when the severity of their injuries and their current state, when we finally make contact with them, trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number is never going to be easy. I wish I had a clear answer for this one, but I really don't.
Yeah, so it's tough. It's just something that's never really been. We may have thought about it, but never really truly thought about it, and they actually experienced it. They also had trouble getting additional resources into the scene because of the existing traffic control devices. So things talking about pre-staging of supplies and stuff can help you. And then also just because of the time of the day, everybody gone home. The festivities were over. It was 3 a.m., even though it is New Orleans. They never sleep, but but for that particular event for New Year's Eve, things were winding down. So everybody was home. Their chief was getting ready to go to bed when he got notification of it. So you just never know when these are going to happen. Then also we mentioned misinformation. There was tons of different rumors that were taking place. They didn't know what was real. There was potential additional active gunshots that were heard, additional events that were taking place. The crews that were on scene didn't know if they were in a safe area or not, so they were looking over their backs the entire time. So it's difficult to do. So here's their New Orleans chief.
Something told me, so I turned my radio on, and you just heard my folks just walking down the street and say, I have 5 dead here, I have 2 dead here, I have red tag here, I have this, I have that. And I'm like, yeah, this is significant. So I hurried up, got redressed, and went back in and joined my team, that was already there managing the situation. So as I got there, they were already on Bourbon Street. They already had a casualty collection point established. They were already walking down, triaging folks, moving people where they needed to be, for transport. And then we started to sort of just organize the scene, right? As far as, staging resources and, clearing the streets, telling the cops to get the cars out the way, and, we can move trucks in and out, right? And so something told me.
Oops. Okay. So this happened here. So here it is, Charlotte again. This is Taste of Charlotte. So we have the potential for things like that happening every week, it seems like, in this area. And so overall, I think the New Orleans response was actually, it was a horrible event, but their response actually worked out well for them. So do we prepare for stuff like this? We actually just did. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak on that briefly. Brian?
Hey, yeah, I don't know if that video came from Chief Salmeron's episode on Project Echo, but if you guys haven't heard of that, that's a great platform, and that he reviewed all of the EMS response. They also had, it was very similar to this conference here. They had ED representation as well as the trauma surgeons that were on duty and leading the hospitals that received the majority of those patients. It's supported by ASPR, which is the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response. It's a great program if you guys haven't heard of it. But yes, it absolutely could happen here. It's one of the things that we've been very concerned about. I know there were some questions in the chat earlier about whether we stand up command assets for football games. Yeah, we do. And a lot of improvements as far as vehicle barriers came directly out of that incident from CMPD as to how they place barriers, where they place them, and how long they're in position for any mass gatherings in the uptown area.
Right. Thank you. All right. So all these events have raised questions, and so things to think about. We don't have to go deep into them, but destinations for patients, trauma centers versus non-trauma centers, and the answer is yes. We ideally would like for them to go to trauma centers, but the reality is that, and it's been a huge event, they may end up at non-trauma centers. So Marissa mentioned this earlier, that you need to be prepared no matter what, and hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And be aware of what might happen, and that you might be the closest hospital to a big event that takes place. They ran into problems with mortuary, both on scene and at the hospitals. And so how do we handle the dead, the fatalities? So something to be thinking about. Mutual aid, at what point do we call for help, both EMS and our hospitals? And how do we do that? POV, we keep driving this home of how do hospitals deal with drive-ups, because that's what's going to happen. Identification and family reunification is overwhelming. We as part of the Care Ones exercise on the previous slide, there was a whole day dedicated to that. So it's an area that we lack on, but we're improving with. So hopefully we'll continue to do better with that. And then supplies. We need more supplies and be able to be prepared for things. And then we don't say the D word, but like diversion of hospitals. Orlando Regional actually did go on diversion, except for Pulse nightclub patients. We are only accepting those, and then other patients will go to other hospitals. And then the next morning they went off of that diversion, and we're able to accept all regular patients. So you don't want to say that, you don't want to think about it, but it's possible. And then how do you call back your staff? And it's great that they came back for this event, but who's going to work tomorrow? Who's going to work the next day? They need time off also. So be thinking about things like that. And so some potential suggestions, supply caches. Do we have extra supplies for that what if, both for events or big wrecks or what have you, but then also at the hospital itself? Are we doing MCI response refreshers? How often are we doing trainings? I think we do a good job here. We could always do better. And so, but is everybody doing this? Is everybody participating in them? Or how are we doing our communication between our different agencies and our hospitals? How do we incorporate our civilians? They're going to be there. They're wanting to help a lot of times. So do we do things like Brian mentioned, throw bags? Can those be given to our civilians on scene if needed? And then also thinking about how can we use other people or actual first responders and use them appropriately. Cross-credentialing of clinical teams. Can another person from a different hospital come to our hospital and be put to work? And so we thought about that, and is there any legalities of it? So be thinking about things like that. So a couple of videos in closing.
And when we teach our folks in EMT school, we teach them the basics of triage, like this is all the colors, and then this is what each color means. And you don't teach them for making that hard decision.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't teach somebody who's 19 years old, fresh out of high school, starting in EMS, getting the EMT, certification. You're not going to, how do you convey to that person that at some point you're going to have to decide if someone lives or dies?
It's tough, but it's the reality of our life now. And now,
Still in people. this can happen anywhere. That's the reality. This can happen in a small town, a big city, whatever it is, this can happen. That's the world that we live in today. We need to be prepared for it. It's never going to go perfect. It's never going to be pretty. But in the end, you're going to look back and you're going to see how many lives you saved and what you did, right? And it's all for making sure that you know of how to respond to it. And so planning is really important, no matter how big your department is, no matter what, what other departments that you interact with. Make sure you're talking to folks, make sure you're having plans of how you're going to respond, make sure you have those conversations before.
So be prepared, train, plan for these kind of things. We're well over our time. So if there's any questions, you can put in the chat and we'll address them, or you can email me and I can respond directly to you. Wanted to thank Dr. Cunningham, Marissa, Brian for being here, and everybody else. Don't forget to do your evaluations at the link that's in the chat. And then also go to the login.facs.org for access to your CMEs. And don't forget to, we have our upcoming symposium, so let us know about that. I appreciate all y'all, and I think it was a lively discussion. So thank you for your time, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.